and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, and we're in the middle of a little mini-series, I guess you could say, of conversations with our state legislators. Last week we had Sandy Pinsino, Chris Morrow, and Dave Durfee in to talk about the session that, well, sort of ended, but not really. And we're hoping to have our two state senators in perhaps next week or the week after. But today, we're really pleased to be joined in the studio by Kathleen James and Rob Hunter. They are the two state representatives from the Bennington 4 district that includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and a part of Sunderland. So we're kind of at an in-between moment, I guess you could say. The legislature did adjourn, May 31st, I think? And
recessed.
But recessed, excuse me. Important term
or
there.
Something,
Yeah.
But you're going to be going back to Montpelier on June 16th, right? For
Monday.
a two-day session to clean up, I guess, a few leftovers, pretty big leftovers. And so I thought, let's start with, I guess, the big one, the education bill, the overhaul that has been talked about a lot over the past 4 or 5 months. Rob, you're a member of the Education Committee. You were deeply involved in at least the House version, which seems to be the main version that's kind of made its way to the end. The State Senate had a version, but right now you have a conference committee of 3 of your colleagues from the state legislature, from the State House, and 3 from the Senate, who are going to be negotiating, I guess, to see if they can come up with a common agreement. So can you bring us up to speed and tell us where that's at this point?
Yeah, and just to recap, I think something that's very important that maybe gets lost in the conversation, because we've been wrangling about small schools and rural schools, and people don't want to lose their schools, and everybody understands this. But framing all of this, I want to just say that the governor wasn't wrong when he said we should do something. We have 40,000 fewer students than we did 30 years ago. There's 84,000 kids, so a third. We've lost a third of our school population, which means that we have a lot of schools that are underpopulated, and we have costs that are continuing to rise. So I think that when we frame, I guess, the situation, you could call it a problem. People were talking about affordability. People were talking about their property taxes going up because, in a large part, the property taxes fund education. Not all of it, but about 66%, I think. So we took what the governor gave us after a couple of months and tried to do our best in our committee to create a similar bill that had similar goals. And the goals really is sort of right-sizing our education system, because we've shrunk, and yet we still have the same amount of schools, and an unfortunate thing is happening. Schools are closing, right? I mean, the school in Ripton just went down. They were down to 3 kids or something. I don't know. It's one of those. We're in a very strange moment in our history, because the student population is shrinking. We've got all these schools. We're turning the lights on. We're turning the heat on. While nobody wants to lose their school and everybody's happy to close somebody else's, we tried to design a bill that would, consolidation has become a very bad word, a very dirty word. But on the other hand, when we say in our bill, we have a minimum class sizes, right, for high school, for middle school, for elementary school, which, as having been a teacher for 32 years, I felt were very reasonable numbers. But for some small schools, they say, well, we're never gonna make this. So clearly some work has to be done about what schools are schools by choice, and which school small by choice, and which are just small because they're just in the hinterlands. And so there's a lot of work to do around that. But the idea is, yes, we need to shrink the size. We need fewer districts. We don't need 119 districts. So all of these became part of the bill. Having a committee to draw district lines, and it gets very complicated once you start saying, okay, well, if we make these districts, then we need voting wards, we need representation, we need all of these things because we're going to have new school boards, we're going to have et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we had it all being 100% implemented, including the foundation formula, by 2029. This will be a sticking point because the governor wants it yesterday. He wants to go from the way we fund now to a formula system, a foundation formula, which is you have this many kids in your district, you get this much money per kid, with weights, for rural kids, for English language learners, that sort of thing. And then the new district figures their allocations out and how they get everything done. It has been an education this year. Having been on this side of the desk for 32 years, and then suddenly now in a committee room hearing testimony from the Principals Association, the superintendents, and so on and so forth, the Rural Schools Alliance, everybody. And to on the one hand, to fundamentally understand we have a situation. We have rising costs, we have numbers of students going down, and so either I guess we shut up and pay our taxes and don't talk about affordability, or keep all of these schools open and keep doing things the way that we're doing. If I start rambling, it's because there's a lot in there. And it is a dilemma. It truly is. And then, of course, you've got the independent schools. We've got not just the 4 historic academies, including Burton, but, geez, I think nearly 100 other independent schools that see that if things aren't done a certain way, that districts aren't drawn a certain way, that if we get rid of supervisory unions, that their days may be numbered. I mean, there are a lot of interests out there and a lot of people who are worried about what this will mean for them. And so considering all of those interests and then considering the larger problem, wow, that is a kettle of fish, as they say, right? And so what was really funny is that at about the 11th hour, I think it was Ruth Hardy who was able to change enough in the Senate bill to get it across their floor.
She's a state senator from Addison County, I think.
Not sure where she's from.
Addison.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, lo and behold, their bill kind of looked a lot like ours. In the end, it didn't start out that way. It looked quite different. But there were several sticking points in there. And so, of course, the conference committee began its work this morning at 10 o'clock. It'll go most of the day, and tomorrow and Friday as well.
So is the goal of this conference committee that's meeting this week to come up with basically the final version that you'll all
compromise that
have on your desks when you get back there next week?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. So
Yeah.
the conference committee started meeting this morning. Our own Seth Bongartz is chairing the Senate team. And their goal is to try to come up with a compromise bill by Friday, end of business day, so that we all have the weekend to look at it and decide how we're going to vote when we go back up on Monday or Tuesday. Right now, where things stand, literally, as we speak, the House is presenting its sort of proposal to the Senate. And as Rob mentioned, the sticking points or some of the final things that folks are paying particular attention to are the timeline. How quickly are we all going to try to get this done? I think a lot of folks, including myself, I don't know where Rob stands, would prefer a slower, more thoughtful timeline. The governor is pushing to get this work done right away.
Let me
how
stop
we're
you there,
gonna-
because I'm
Yeah.
curious, why is that? I mean, it strikes me that this is a really complicated overhaul that happens like once a generation, if that.
Yeah.
This is comparable to an X60, X68 moment when
Bigger.
you're looking at really drastically changing
The landscape.
the way education is financed and governed in the state. Why would we want to get this in so quickly that
Well, it's political,
all
right?
the stakeholders haven't a chance to weigh in and say, hey, what about?
Yeah, it's political. I think Governor Scott wants to check off the property tax box, and I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but I have thought from the beginning that Governor Scott's timeline on this felt reckless, and it still feels very quick. to me, and that's not to discount or undersell the important priority. Vermonters spoke loud and clear. None of us can afford these property tax bills, and that probably includes everybody at this table. And so the need for property tax relief is important, but I think it's important that folks understand that there's nothing in any bill that we're talking about right now that's going to bring immediate property tax relief. All of these changes are going to take several years, 4 years, 5 years to really try to bring long-term property tax stability to Vermonters. So since that's the fact, we might as well make sure that we're doing this right and not, in my opinion, just upsetting the entire apple cart so that we can check off some political box in time for the November 2026 elections. So I think that there's a political bonfire started last year around property tax affordability. It was a legitimate bonfire, but I don't think we should make it drive a hasty solution or a timeline that doesn't work for our schools and for our kids. So they're up in Montpelier right now, the conference committee. They're going to be arguing about things like the timeline, whether the optional district maps include one that maintains supervisory unions. That's beneficial. Supervisory unions are beneficial to our tuitioning districts and to a lot of our smaller schools. So that's something I hope we're able to keep on the table. Minimum class size standards, I think, are something they're going to be talking about. They're going to be talking a lot about the percentage of students on public tuition that independent schools need to basically demonstrate in order to keep being eligible to receive tuition dollars. That's very relevant to all of our independent schools around here. Schools like BBA and Long Trail easily clear any mark they're talking about. Schools like Maple Street and Stratton Mountain School are in a gray zone right now. That's not determined. Whether we include a weight, which for secondary, for high school students, basically giving schools that educate high school students a little bit more in that base funding. Very important issue to BBA, and one that I've been spending a lot of time on the past couple days. And basically, in general, the overall tax system that we try to put in place to fund all of this so that it truly, over time, brings stability to our property tax payment and doesn't raise taxes on the very districts that, can least afford it.
Yeah,
so there's a lot on the table right now.
I mean, that's one interesting part of that foundation formula idea is that it could actually impact districts or towns that have been sort of frugal, I guess, or have been low spending relative.
That's a good word. I mean, because some people would say they're underfunding.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Bennington is a great example. If you look at Bennington in our area, and I was just looking at some charts yesterday, under the new, basically, let's call it a block grant. Under the new block grant foundation formula, Bennington is going to get significantly more money than it's been voting itself. So the state is going to say, Bennington, you know what? We appreciate your frugality, but you haven't been spending an adequate amount to educate your kids. So here, have more money. That's also going to mean that Bennington's tax rate is going to go up. And so I was reading the House proposal last night to boil down a very complicated thing. The House has a lot of mechanisms built in to allow districts like Bennington to phase in the additional spending, to ameliorate, the raising taxes, to try to make sure that even if the Bennington tax rate is going up, that the people in Bennington are qualifying for a big rebate, a big homestead property tax exemption, so maybe their bill doesn't go up.
Right.
So it's like this Rubik's Cube, and when you read that 151-page bill, half of it is the tax structure.
Right.
And it's a very complicated machine, and you want it to line up like a solved Rubik's Cube so that in the end, the Bennington schools, and I'm just picking on Bennington, but the Bennington schools get more money in a way that their taxpayers, both tax rate-wise, but individually, household by household, can afford. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, then you'd have communities that have been very generous, shall we say,
Right.
and now they're going to get less under the foundation formula, at least the projected numbers that I've seen so far. So does that mean their taxes will go down?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting flip, right?
Yeah,
It is,
as they
Right.
cut programs and teachers.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's two sides of the same
Yeah.
coin, right? I mean, we have colleagues from, you know, up in Winooski and some of the Chittenden County
CVU and- yep.
districts who are having the exact opposite concern. They look at a foundation formula and they think, my God, we're going to have to cut, you know, $30 million
gonna
from our
lose
district
millions. Yep.
budget.
Yep.
So they're less excited actually about lower taxes because,
That's not going to happen.
well, we'll see.
Well, there's that too.
So you know what's going to happen? I have no idea. The conference. I don't know when this is airing. This could all be done. by
Right,
the time
I know.
this
By the
airs.
time a lot of folks hear this, well, it might have been
Yeah, the
overtaken
conference
by events,
committee
but,
could
it
fail.
just points out the complexity, I think.
Yeah.
that you're
Well, they could fail to come to an agreement,
Yeah.
and they could walk away,
waiting
and then
till
we don't
next
have
year.
anything to vote on. They could come to an agreement, and the House and the Senate still have to pass it. All of us have to vote yes. This is a big bill. People have a lot of concerns and questions.
Lot of concerns, yeah.
So we could come out of this next week with nothing, and then Governor Scott says he'll make us stay in session until we pass something. He can't actually constitutionally do that. He can call us back into session, and then we either come and, I don't know what, start over, come and pick up where we left off,
Yeah.
or we say, hey, Gov, you know, we're going to gavel in and gavel out because we're not ready to pass a bill right now, and we'll see you in
See you in
next
January.
January.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going to happen. It's wild.
Okay, well, certainly we could spend our entire time here, I'm sure, talking about the ins and outs of this bill, but let's move on to a few of the other issues, because education and the bill around changing up the system was not the only thing you were doing and had to be concerned about it. The other thing, I just wondered if you could kind of quickly tell us where we're standing with the health insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield problem. It sounds like they were paying out a lot in reimbursements. 3 years in a row, they're financially underwater, and now concerned about bankruptcy. They're the biggest insurer in the state. I mean, that sounds serious. Is
Yeah.
anything need to happen quickly to kind of at least patch that up for a while, or?
We actually, I mean, I can take a first cut at that, and then then maybe Rob could chime in a little bit about the important role that the cost of healthcare plays in the education conversation.
Right.
But we actually, you know, it's funny. This session has just been completely dominated by conversations about education reform, quite rightly. But in the meantime, we had a really successful session, and in other areas. And boy, if there's anything I say today, I hope people have a minute to take a look at some of the other work we've done, because we made progress on healthcare at a pace that I've not seen during my time in the legislature. So knowing that Blue Cross Blue Shield is teetering on the brink of insolvency, we did pass a bill that would allow the Green Mountain Care Board to kind of step in and charge hospitals more, which is going to help Blue Cross Blue Shield if it looks like a, you know, major insurer is struggling. That's Blue Cross. So we passed that bill. We give the Green Mountain Care Board the ability to step in. We passed a really important bill, S-126, I think it is, that over time is going to move Vermont to a system called reference-based pricing. And basically in that, the Green Mountain Care Board and hospitals will be pegging the cost of services to multipliers of the Medicaid rate and, the Medicare rate. And that's a major cost containment strategy and a predictability strategy. So that'll take a couple years to kick in, but I've been hearing reference-based pricing talked about as kind of a game changer for years, and we did it. So that's exciting. We passed a bill that will cap the amount that hospitals can charge for drugs that they administer on site, like in a cancer center, like if you go for chemo. That's a big deal. That was a
That's a big
tougher
deal.
vote.
Yep.
That was a tougher vote because that's going to be rough on major employers and providers like Southwestern Vermont Medical, like our Bennington Hospital, while taking, I think, a very well-deserved crack at UVM Medical Center, which was called a price gouger in some of our floor debates. That wasn't pretty. So we made a lot of progress on healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the education conversation as well.
Sure, because that is, as you say, one of the big cost
It's
drivers.
one of the big drivers.
I'm sure a lot of people think, hey, wait a minute, there are fewer kids, it should be less expensive. But
Oh my God.
when your health insurance costs are going up like crazy, that wipes that out.
Right, and I want to say that we have the highest premiums in the country.
We do.
It's
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
well, we have an aging population, and birth rates are going down, and yeah, I mean it's kind of a perfect storm. Yeah. Yeah, it's depressing.
Let me move on then to
Yeah.
another question. I was about to make a funny joke, but I think I thought better of that.
Good call.
Housing was also an area you guys worked on. There was a bill that came out that would, I guess, allow for, well, similar to like the Putnam project in Bennington, where the tax
TIF and
increment
CHIP.
financing, TIF, or tax incentive, I think it's tax increment, would allow you basically to kind of borrow from the eventual value of a building or a project to help pay for or incentivize the development of it. My understanding is that's going to sort of expand the program to make it more available to smaller communities.
Yes.
That
To
was-
specific
than was the case
projects.
before.
Yeah, CHIP's exciting. It's another idea that we've been talking about for years and not able to get it done, and we got it done.
done.
So, basically, it takes this concept of tax increment financing, which right now in Vermont is applied to big districts, like all of downtown St. Albans, all of downtown Bennington. And it makes it much smaller. It can be applied to individual projects. And so developers can apply for financing, like say bonding or whatever, to pay for infrastructure that's needed for housing. So like water, sewer, sidewalks. And then they can use the property tax revenue. So you get an empty lot that becomes a really great housing development. So the property tax value goes from nothing to a lot. And you can use a big chunk of that property tax revenue to pay off the debt that you use to finance that infrastructure. So it makes a lot of housing projects basically kind of pencil out or financially viable that weren't before. And gosh, I think we heard that 250 at least sites or projects or regions around the state are going to be eligible to apply for this, to put together CHIP deals. And I think they said that ultimately it could unlock a total of $2 billion worth of housing financing. I mean, it's a very, very big deal. And I hope communities and developers around here, once we get the project or the program actually up and running, apply for it and are approved and start building some great stuff.
Yeah, that went to conference committee, and one of the sticking points was they wanted to cap the amount that was available each year. It went from 40 million to 200 million.
Yeah. It was a big kind of argument in the conference committee because, the underlying, it's property taxes, so you're talking about revenue to the ed fund, but for those of us who kind of support CHIP and TIF, the argument is, well, with a vacant lot that's nothing, you've got no money coming into the ed fund. And so, even if the amount of property taxes is this much on that new housing complex, and that much of it goes to the ed fund, and that much of it is paying off a bond, well, it's still that much more going to the ed fund.
Right.
But we did argue a lot about how much of that we wanted to kind of put onto the ed fund, and we came up with a pretty big number. it's going to be really interesting to see over the 10-year life of this pilot what we can get done. And I hope some projects right around here.
Yep.
Yeah, because I was thinking this housing has been a hot topic down here, as it has been, I'm sure,
It's
everywhere
statewide.
in the
Yep.
state and
Yep.
Yeah.
probably across the country as well. But I was wondering if this would sort of be a bit of a game changer to help incentivize or make some of the projects we've been hearing about, locally,
Right.
kind of pencil out.
Well, I
and
wonder
kind
if the airport road, whether that may
that would seem
that
like a
might
logical.
be a perfect.
Seems like a logical fit, but who
I'm
knows?
not-
But
I'm
yeah,
not-
but every year, when I think about all the progress we've made on housing, and it's, in many ways, it's still not visible, which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
Or, but in 2020, we invested, hundreds of dollars in ARPA money to build and renovate, and year after year, we've passed a series of bills that make it easier to build housing, to kind of focusing on the regulatory thing, right? Like, how can we make it easier to build housing in our downtowns and neighborhoods? How can we concentrate development in our downtowns and neighborhoods and, keep Vermont still looking like Vermont out in the countryside? And then the Act 250 overhaul was huge. So year after year after year, the past 4 or 5 years, we've taken a big bite out of housing, money, regulatory reform, Act 250 update, and now CHIP. So,
There's a lot. There's a lot.
10 years from now, I'm
Yep.
hoping we can look back and say, wow, we really,
Yep.
we really got some stuff done.
Over to you, private sector.
Yeah.
Well, in the few minutes we have left, I also just wanted to ask you real quick about sort of a bigger picture question. I guess, over the past few months, we've seen the federal government cut back some grant projects that were kind of typically in the federal budget. And there's about 30%, I think, roughly, of the state budget is
More, a little bit more.
comes out of from federal sources, essentially. It's not like all the property taxpayers locally or around the state pay for everything. So I guess uncertainty has been the buzzword for the past few months around, what might be not there that typically has been and has been anticipated to be. So when you guys were working on the state budget for next year, the so-called big bill, that
Yeah,
must have been
just the
a
big
difficult
bill, by the
factor to
way.
kind of weigh, into the mix there. It's like,
As opposed to the big, beautiful
I was going
bill.
to say, it's just a bill.
Oh,
It's
right.
just a big bill.
Well, it's actually what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, in our state budget, always nicknamed fondly the big bill, we did something that it's not unprecedented necessarily, but we set aside $100 million in anticipated surplus revenue as a cushion against potential federal budget cuts. Because right now in Congress, the big, beautiful bill that the Trump administration is advancing contains quite a lot of tax breaks for very wealthy people and potential deep cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. And so
SNAP is the food assistance program.
SNAP
Yes.
is food assistance and Medicaid is obviously health care for low-income Vermonters. So if there are deep cuts to vital federal programs that Vermonters rely on, we have set aside $100 million. Honestly, it's a drop in the bucket
I was going to say, yeah.
to the 400 million or whatever the need would be. But still,
Right.
we do have some money set aside. And I believe that after we go back up to the State House on Monday and Tuesday, I believe that when we pass our final adjournment resolution, it's going to contain some really interesting language allowing us to return to the State House in the fall if, for example, Trump's big, beautiful bill passes and it looks like we need to come back to session and make some changes to our state budget. Normally, we would go back in January, and the first big bill, financial bill we work on is the mid-year budget adjustment. But we've built in some provisions so that the Joint Fiscal Committee and the Emergency Board can do some tinkering over the summer, the fall if they need to, or the full legislature would come back to the State House earlier than normal if there's a real budget crisis. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens to that budget reconciliation bill that's, you know, lurching its way through Congress in DC right now.
So just real quick, in the minute or so we have left, any other bills that you worked on in your committees that we didn't have a chance to at least mention?
Well, I will say this. In our House, in our miscellaneous education bill, there's a lot of stuff in there, including funding for National Guard to go to college, that sort of thing. But one thing I am particularly excited about is the cell phone free schools part of that bill. And it's not cell phone free, it's a bell to bell. In other words, the kids come to school, they leave their phone at the front desk or whatever, someplace, and then they go and live their lives all day without their phones. And, you know,
you can do that.
I mean, like, you know, a very simplistic view is to say, it's just a break from the phone for 6 or 7 hours, right? No one's taking it away. They get to have their phone before school, after school. But if we say, okay, but there's actually a real serious side to that too. Last spring, the Surgeon General said social media is harming our kids. Okay, so there is a health risk, and we see it because anybody can go and look. I mean, the studies come out every week, every month. You see more studies. Teenage suicide, teenage depression, teenage anxiety. So for those of us who have been in the classroom and watched this evolution, all evidence points to the phone, right? And so we actually took testimony from a couple of schools. Kids came in who have the bell to bell, and I'll tell you what, they were happy. They were happy. And the administrators are like, oh my God, the cafeteria went from a quiet place to a noisy place again. Kids talk to each other in the hallway. I mean,
wow.
You know, I mean, it sounds so old-fashioned, and yet this is how it's supposed to be. Right? And we know, and even the studies show that if you have your phone sitting on the desk upside down, you're still thinking about it, right? I mean, the studies are amazing, and I am just so happy, and I hope that on Monday we are voting 480 through, and that will become a requirement for Vermont schools. And I want to say there are 12 that have already passed bell to bell, 12 states that have already passed it, language very much like ours, they borrowed from us, and there are 8 more that are pending. So that'll be, half of this country will be phone-free schools, probably in the
good
fall.
model for other states to look at.
You know what? And it has to happen. It just has to happen.
Yeah, and very much hoping Governor Scott signs S69. That's the kid code. It's related. But that bill, if Governor Scott signs it, will require social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok to design their platforms in a way that are less addictive and harmful for Vermont young people. So big fan of that bill. Rob and I both supported it. I attended a great rally for it at the roundabout with some student leaders from BBA, and I hope it wins his signature.
So some computer coder sitting in Silicon Valley now has to put a little bit of code in to kind of make it the Instagram feed that goes to Vermont?
Yeah, and they can easily do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't it nuts?
Yeah.
It's just the manipulation that is happening. And they call them smartphones because they're smarter than we are. And we all know that. We know that.
Yep. Well, that certainly is a fascinating area and one we'll be closely following. And yeah, I mean, there's no reason to think that the governor wouldn't sign that smart bill bill. He hasn't indicated that his concerns.
We'll wait and see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I have no idea.
We shall see.
Why wouldn't you? Like, that's one of those, why wouldn't you?
I mean, that seems like
it's about the kids.
as close to a
It's about
no-brainer
health.
as it gets, but
Well,
but I guess who knows, right? We shall see. All right. Well, on that note, we'll have to leave it there for today. But once again, thank you to Kathleen James and Rob Hunter, the state representatives from Bennington 4. I appreciate you making the time for this conversation to bring our viewers up to speed on what's going on up under the Golden Dome, and more to come, I guess.
All right.
thank you, Andrew.
Stay tuned.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.